The first thing Emily Carter noticed was the moving truck blocking her driveway. And the second was the feeling in her chest that made no sense at all. She was already late for work, coffee cooling in her travel mug when she saw him step down from the truck next door. Kay moved slowly, like someone who had learned not to rush life anymore. Tall, calm, not looking around with excitement, but with quiet thought, as if this house was not a beginning but a pause. Emily should have been annoyed. Instead, she forgot to breathe. She had lived on this street in a quiet Oregon suburb for almost 8 years. Nothing ever changed here. That was why she chose it after her divorce. Predictable streets, polite neighbors, no surprises. No emotions she couldn't control. Yet one stranger stepping out of a truck shattered that careful balance. He looked up at the sky, then at the house, then, without warning, toward Emily's window. Their eyes met. For one short second, the world stopped. Then he smiled. It wasn't confident or charming. It was unsure, almost careful. Like he didn't want to ask for too much from a place or a person he had just met. Emily stepped back from the window as if caught doing something wrong. This is nothing, she told herself. Just a neighbor. But her heart did not listen. Emily had learned how to live quietly. After her marriage ended, she rebuilt her life in smaller pieces. She became a high school librarian, surrounded by order and calm. Books didn't demand explanations. Stories stayed on the page unless you invited them in. She told herself she liked being alone. That morning, she drove to work thinking about nothing but catalog numbers and overdue returns. Still, his face appeared in her mind at red lights and stop signs. The way he had smiled, like someone who hadn't smiled much lately. By the time she got home, the truck was gone. The house next door looked awake for the first time in years. Lights were on. Emily stood in her driveway longer than usual, keys in hand, staring at the porch she had ignored for so long. She didn't know it then, but that was the moment her life shifted. The first week passed without words. Emily saw him in pieces of time. Early mornings carrying boxes inside. Late evenings sitting on the front steps with his phone untouched in his hand. Once she saw him fixing the loose mailbox like it mattered to him. He didn't bring friends, no loud music, no signs of a new beginning. It felt like he was settling into something he hadn't planned. She learned his name by accident. A delivery. Truck stopped in front of her house and the driver handed her a box. Daniel Brooks, the label read. Emily hesitated, then walked next door. Her knock was softer than she meant it to be. The door opened almost right away, like he had been waiting. "Oh, hey," he said, surprised but warm. "I was wondering where that went." "You're Daniel," she said. "I'm Emily. Next door." He smiled again, the same careful smile. "Nice to officially meet you." Their conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. But when Emily walked back into her house, her hands were shaking. She didn't understand why. Nothing had happened, and yet something had. After that, small moments became routine. A day, waved. When they left for work, spoke about the weather, about the age of the houses, about the street being too quiet sometimes. Daniel worked remotely, she learned. Something in consulting. He didn't talk much about it. He listened more than he spoke. That was new for Emily. One evening, she was struggling to carry groceries inside when he appeared beside her without noise. "Let me help," he said. She hesitated, then nodded. As they walked up her steps, she felt aware of him in a way she hadn't felt about anyone in years. Not attraction exactly. Something deeper. Something steadier. "Thank you," she said. "Any time," he replied. "That's what neighbors are for, right?" She smiled, but her chest tightened, because she knew she hadn't let anyone be any time for a very long time. Emily told herself she was imagining things. But when the power went out one night and the street fell into darkness, she felt disappointed when she didn't see him outside. Then she heard his voice. "Looks like we're back in the old days." He stood at the edge of her porch holding a flashlight. She laughed, a real laugh. one she hadn't heard from herself in years. They sat on her steps, candles between them, talking softly while the world felt smaller. Daniel talked about moving often as a child, about never feeling fully settled anywhere. Emily talked about books, about how stories helped people feel less alone. Neither mentioned the things that truly hurt them, but they didn't need to. There was comfort in not explaining. When the lights came back on, neither of them moved right away. "I'm glad. You live next door," Daniel said. Emily nodded. So was she. And that realization scared her. Days passed faster after that. They began walking in the evenings. Sometimes with words, sometimes without. Silence didn't feel heavy with Daniel. It felt shared. Emily noticed how careful he was with people. How he asked before stepping closer. How he never assumed. One afternoon, she caught herself looking forward to seeing him more than anything else in her day. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. She knew this feeling, and she knew how it ended. So she promised herself she would stay guarded. The moment that changed everything came quietly. Emily returned home one afternoon to find Daniel sitting on the curb, head in his hands. She stopped. "Are you okay?" He looked up, surprised, then nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just one of those days." She sat beside him without thinking. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I didn't plan this move," he said finally. "Sometimes life pushes you somewhere before you're ready." Emily understood. She had lived inside that sentence for years. "You don't have to explain," she said. Daniel looked at her then, really looked. "Thank you." That single word felt heavier than a full story. From that day on, something unspoken connected them. Emily found herself caring again. Not loudly, not recklessly, but truly. She noticed how her house felt warmer, okay? How mornings felt lighter. And she noticed the fear growing alongside the hope, okay? Because nothing this good had ever stayed. The news came on a normal evening. They were standing between their houses talking about nothing important. "I might be leaving," Daniel said suddenly. Emily felt the ground shift. "Leaving," she repeated, steady on the outside, breaking inside. "A job offer in Canada." "Nothing decided yet." She nodded, smiled. Inside, her heart closed a door she had barely opened. That night, she sat alone in her living room, realizing something painful and clear. The quiet life she had built was no longer enough. And loving quietly still meant loving. She didn't know it yet, but part one of her story was ending. And the hardest choice was still ahead. The moment Daniel said he might leave, Emily felt the world tilt under her feet. She had spent weeks convincing herself that distance, emotional or physical, was safer than hope. That caring for someone again was too risky. But hearing the words out loud made her pulse race in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was sudden, it was sharp, and it made her realize she didn't want to let him go. She had been walking home from work, the sky painted in streaks of orange and gray, when he called her over to the edge of the driveway. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his posture tense. Emily's chest tightened as she stepped closer, trying to appear calm, even though inside panic clawed at her. "I might be leaving," he said, looking at the ground instead of her. Emily forced a smile she didn't feel. "Oh, that's exciting," she said. Her voice sounded small even to her own ears. She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, to stop him from going, but she didn't. Words had a way of trapping emotions, and she didn't want to reveal how much his presence had changed her life in just a few short weeks. Daniel continued. "I got a job offer in Vancouver. It's a good opportunity, but nothing is final yet. I just wanted you to know." He looked up, meeting her eyes briefly before looking away again. The vulnerability in his expression made Emily's chest ache. She realized then how deeply she had grown attached to him without even noticing. For the next few days, Emily found herself walking through her house in a haze. Every corner, every quiet space reminded her of Daniel. The porch swing where they had sat talking about nothing in particular, the spot by the maple tree where his dog liked to nap. Even the mailbox he had fixed it all felt personal now, as if he had left traces of himself in every corner of her life. She tried to push him from her mind, convincing herself she didn't need this upheaval. It's just a neighbor. She whispered to herself one morning, staring out the kitchen window as sunlight spilled over the street. But the truth was undeniable. He had become part of her life in a way she hadn't expected. Emily avoided seeing him as much as she could, shortening conversations to polite nods and smiles, hoping that distance might dull the intensity of her feelings. But Daniel noticed the change immediately. One evening, as she hurried past him on the sidewalk, he called out, "Emily, wait!" She froze, heart pounding. He fell into step beside her, his hands gesturing nervously. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily hesitated. Everything inside her wanted to say yes, to admit that she was terrified of how much she cared, that she didn't know how to handle someone who made her feel alive again. But she swallowed the words. "No," she said softly, looking straight ahead. "I'm just being careful." Daniel's eyes searched hers, patient yet questioning. "Careful can mean many things," he said, "but I don't want to lose what we have either." Her chest tightened again. That simple admission, the way he looked at her, made her realize she had been living a life of self-imposed quiet, thinking she was safe, but in reality, she was missing the joy she hadn't allowed herself to feel. She remembered the laugh they shared over the power outage, the long walks with his dog, the evening spent on the porch with candles flickering between them. These moments had become her lifeline without her even noticing. The fear of change was intense, but so was the pull of possibility. She thought about letting him go, about returning to the quiet she had carefully built around herself. But the idea of never seeing him again, of never experiencing the warmth and gentle understanding he brought into her life, was unbearable. A few days later, Emily found herself at the edge of her yard as rain began to fall lightly. She saw Daniel loading boxes into his truck, each movement deliberate, as if he were trying to slow time before leaving. The sight of him in the rain, coat damp, hair falling slightly over his forehead, made her chest tighten painfully. She couldn't let this moment pass without saying something. "Daniel." She called out, sprinting toward him, shoes squelching. In the wet grass, he turned, startled, but relief and surprise flickered across his face when he saw her running. She stopped just short of the truck, heart racing so fast it hurt. "Wait, I can't let you go without knowing, without saying something." He looked at her, soaked and hesitant, hands gripping the truck lightly. "Emily, I don't know how to be brave," she said, voice trembling. "But I know I don't want to live another quiet life pretending I don't feel anything. You've changed that. You've made me care again, and I'm not ready to give it up." Daniel studied her face, his expression softening. The tension in his body eased as he stepped closer, closing the small space between them. "I wasn't looking to change anyone's life," he said softly, "but I didn't expect mine to change either." Emily's eyes filled with tears, though she didn't let them fall. She stepped forward, closing the gap between them completely. "Then don't leave," she said simply, holding nothing back this time. "Stay if you want to." Daniel smiled then, the kind of smile that was steady and warm, the kind that made fear feel smaller and hope feel alive. "I'm staying," he said, "if you'll let me." She didn't answer with words. She answered with a step forward, closing the distance entirely. The rain soaked their coats, but neither of them cared. They stood there, close and breathing the same air, knowing that everything had changed in that moment. Over the weeks that followed, Emily and Daniel settled into a rhythm together. Days filled with shared meals, evening walks, and quiet conversations became the foundation of a relationship neither had expected. They learned to trust each other slowly, carefully, savoring the moments without rushing. Emily found herself laughing again more often, dreaming again, and allowing herself to imagine a future she hadn't dared to hope for. Daniel's presence reminded her that life wasn't meant to be endured quietly. It was meant to be lived fully with risks and with risks and rewards, with pain and joy intertwined. And love, she realized, wasn't about grand gestures or sudden fireworks. It was about small, steady moments that built a life worth sharing. Emily never forgot the day he moved in. The quiet street, the dark blue truck, the brief glance through the window that had set everything in motion. She learned that sometimes life delivers love softly, gently, without warning. And that the right person doesn't just appear, they settle into your life and suddenly the world feels alive again. Years later, Emily would look back on that moment with gratitude. Daniel hadn't rescued her or fixed the past. He had reminded her of what was possible. He had shown her that opening her heart again was not a weakness, but a strength. And that was enough to change her life forever.